Inside a classroom, a man stood in front of a schoolgirl, adjusting a camera mounted on a stand. He reassured her that it was only a preliminary interview before the official shoot and encouraged her to relax and not feel nervous. However, when he turned back to the camera, he grew visibly flustered, muttering under his breath as he struggled with a button that refused to work. The girl calmly told him to take his time. She flipped through the pages of a book on the desk, her expression unreadable and completely detached. Noticing her blank demeanor, the cameraman let out an awkward laugh and scratched the back of his neck, admitting that he might be the nervous one instead. He explained that this was his first documentary as a main director. Still, the girl remained silent, her eyes never leaving the book. As the silence thickened, the man quickly pulled out his phone and attempted to call the other students scheduled to attend. After several unanswered rings, he could only hope the call would be picked up. Elsewhere, a phone vibrated on a nearby table, displaying the director's name on the screen. The owner of the phone, however, was too absorbed in painting to notice. Completely focused on the canvas in front of him, he ignored the call entirely. Moments later, another person rushed into the room, stopping just inside the doorway to catch his breath, one hand braced on his knee. Despite this sudden entrance, the painter did not react. Growing impatient, the newcomer shouted the painter's name, calling out to Wung Choi. Even then, Choi showed no response, his attention fixed solely on the artwork before him. Back in the classroom, the girl finally closed her book and stood up, stating that she would be leaving since it didn't seem like any filming would happen that day. The cameraman hurriedly asked her to wait, still trying to reach the missing student, but she ignored him. She slipped the book into her bag, zipped it shut, and headed for the door. Lowering his phone, the man called out her name, Yeonsu, informing her that Wung had said he was on his way. Even so, she continued toward the exit. At that moment, the classroom door opened from the outside. Wung Choi stepped in with a pencil clenched between his lips, stopping just inches away from her. Yeonsu froze, surprise flashing briefly across her face before she frowned sharply and looked up at him. Wung met her gaze cautiously, neither of them saying a word. A few minutes later, both Wung and Yeonsu were seated across from the director, who now wore a sheepish smile. He expressed his relief that the documentary's main subjects were finally together and attempted to lighten the mood by asking them to complete a statement about first impressions and lasting relationships. His question was met with silence as both students stared at him blankly, as though none of his words were registering. Sensing the discomfort, the man laughed nervously and introduced himself properly as director Dong-il Park. He explained that he would be filming their documentary for the next month, starting the following day. He added somewhat awkwardly that being called director made him feel embarrassed and suggested they simply refer to him as Mr. instead. When neither student reacted, the director's smile slowly faded. Realizing he was being ignored, he abandoned his attempts at small talk and slid printed documents across the table. He explained that the documentary aimed to explore the everyday lives of Korean high school students from different backgrounds, focusing on their worries, routines, and personal realities as they navigated adolescence. In simple terms, the documentary involved observing their school lives for a month. They were told to go about their days as usual and behave naturally. The director repeated that this was only a pre-interview and that there was no need to feel nervous, though it was clear he was the most uncomfortable person in the room. Once the camera was set, he suggested they begin with brief self-introductions and asked Wung to start. Wung introduced himself as Wung Choi and stopped there, offering nothing more. The director let out a nervous laugh and commented that it was understandable since it was supposedly Wung's first time in front of a camera, though the lack of effort was painfully obvious. The director then turned to Yeonsu. She introduced herself as Yeonsu Guk, 19 years old, and explained that although she was nervous because it was her first documentary, she would do her best. The director's reaction was immediate. He jumped to his feet, visibly delighted. It was, in his eyes, perfect. Almost too perfect. Noticing this, Wung pointed out that he hadn't received the same reaction. The director quickly approached him, patting his shoulders and insisting he hadn't meant to show favoritism, adding that Wung was charming as well. When Wung asked if he truly meant it, the director reassured him with a smile before returning to the camera and announcing they would proceed to the next question. The director then asked why they had agreed to participate in the documentary despite being busy with school during their final year. Wung raised his hand first and asked if he could answer honestly. After being given permission, he admitted that he had agreed because his parents had asked him to. Seeing the director's expression change, he quickly laughed and clarified that it didn't mean he was unwilling to participate, adding that he wouldn't run away. The director thanked him for the reassurance before turning to Yeonsu. Yeonsu explained that she found the concept of the documentary interesting and believed the experience would be valuable to add to her resume. She emphasized that joining had been entirely her own decision. Wung glanced at her sideways, while the director observed them closely, sensing a faint tension between the two. Clearing his throat, the director moved on, asking them to talk about their interests, what they liked, their hobbies, and even their dislikes. Wung went first, saying he enjoyed drawing and sleeping and couldn't think of anything he disliked. Yeonsu followed, explaining that she liked reading and had a strong interest in history, including that of other countries. As she continued, mentioning her recent interest in environmental issues and predicting climate change as a major global concern in the next decade, Wung's expression gradually dulled. By then, he was visibly struggling to stay alert. As Yeonsu moved on to her dislikes, she mentioned having many, one of which included people who slept excessively, yet still yawned throughout the day. Her gaze briefly shifted toward Wung. Realizing she was referring to him, Wung covered his mouth, eyes widening. Yeonsu added that such behavior felt like a waste of life, something she found deeply unappealing. Wung blinked repeatedly, stunned, as if he had been slapped without warning. Sensing the growing tension, the director smiled anxiously and suggested changing the topic. He asked about their dreams. Wung said he simply wanted to eat good food and live comfortably, while Yeonsu responded that life without goals was meaningless to her, and that her dream was to achieve each of her goals one by one. When asked about favorite movie genres, Wung chose sci-fi and monster films, while Yeonsu expressed her dislike for unrealistic movies. Asked to choose between jjajangmyeon and jampong, Wung selected sweet and sour pork instead, while Yeonsu chose jampong. After hearing their responses, the director paused the recording and gently pointed out that they didn't need to intentionally oppose each other just because they were filming. Both immediately insisted that they were being completely natural. The director laughed, noting it was the first time they had agreed on something. He then asked about their first impressions of each other. Yeonsu raised her hand at once, asking if she could be fully honest. As she prepared to speak, her mind briefly replayed Wung barging into the classroom late, rushing past her and tripping over himself. Before she could say anything, Wung jumped up, loudly protesting that such questions were usually asked separately on television. Yeonsu remained seated, her expression tight and displeased, finding his constant outbursts unsightly. The director diffused the situation by saying the pre-interview had gone well enough and asked if they had any questions. Yeonsu immediately inquired about their deposit. The director assured her the money would be transferred the next day, with full payment after filming concluded. She noted this down and asked to be informed once the final date was decided, which he agreed to. As they prepared to leave, the director suggested getting food together to celebrate their first meeting. While standing, Wung hesitated before apologizing to Yeonsu for being late earlier. She didn't respond, focused on her phone, and said she needed to leave. The director stopped her briefly, suggesting they take a commemorative photo. They stood close together as the camera was set. At the director's countdown, they glanced at each other, and when the shutter clicked, both wore stiff, awkward smiles. And with that, the documentary officially moved into a month-long glimpse into the lives of the first place and last place students. Back at the office, director Dong-il was carefully pinning the photo of Wung and Yeonsu onto the wall when he paused to admire it, clearly pleased with how it turned out. While he was still staring at the picture, two colleagues approached him. One commented that his documentary idea sounded impressive, while the other asked whether filming with students had been difficult. Dong-il laughed lightly and replied that it hadn't been hard at all, describing both students as great kids. He even remarked that he felt lucky to always work with such good people, chuckling as he said it. But the very next day proved otherwise. Chaos broke out almost immediately. Yeonsu raised her voice, angrily pointing out that what was happening had never been discussed. She demanded to know why she was suddenly expected to sit next to Wung in class for the entire month of filming, gesturing sharply in his direction. Meanwhile, Wung appeared completely spaced out, barely reacting. The director tried to laugh it off, nervously scratching the back of his neck and reminding her that she had been fine sitting beside Wung during the interview the day before. Yeonsu cut him off at once, insisting that this situation was different and demanding to see the contract immediately. Sweat began to bead on the director's face. After a moment, he clasped his hands together and apologized quietly. While this unfolded, Wung casually dropped into a chair, pulled out his sketchbook, and began drawing with full concentration. That focus didn't last long. Someone slammed past him, knocking into him hard. He turned sharply to see Yeonsu sitting down with obvious irritation, offering no apology. Wung shouted at her without thinking. She turned slowly, her eyes darkening as she asked what his problem was. The shift in her expression was enough to make Wung shrink back instantly, muttering that it was nothing. Later that day, Wung told his friend that the look Yeonsu had given him felt like a warning, that if he crossed the line, she would end him. He insisted it had been terrifying. His friend listened calmly, sipping his drink, and remarked that Yeonsu didn't seem like the violent type, finding the situation unexpected. Wung leaned against the window, wishing he had never agreed to participate in the documentary, and wondering how he was supposed to survive an entire month beside her. His friend advised him to try getting along with her, pointing out that things likely went wrong from the start because Wung had been late. Wung replied that he had tried to apologize, but she hadn't accepted it. Just then, the bell rang. Realizing something, Wung suddenly asked if the documentary would also force him to eat lunch with her. As they headed toward the cafeteria, he continued grumbling under his breath. As expected, 2 lunch trays were placed down, one in front of Wung and the other in front of Yeonsu. They ate in silence. Wung felt sick with tension but remembered his friend's advice. Clearing his throat, he called out to Yeonsu and suggested that they had started off badly. Since they would be stuck together for the next month, he thought they should at least try to get along. Yeonsu responded with a cold stare, then calmly put in her earphones and continued eating. Taking that as his cue, Wung laughed awkwardly, stood up, and declared he would go find Director Park, convincing himself he had tried his best. As he lifted his tray, he lost his balance. The tray struck a cup of water, sending it spilling across Yeonsu's side of the table. He immediately apologized. Yeonsu stopped eating and slowly looked down at the water. Minutes later, Wung lay sprawled on the floor, gasping dramatically, while his friend stood over him. Wung weakly declared that if he was found dead within the month, Yeonsu Guk was responsible. His friend told him to get up and wipe the ketchup stain off his shirt. Sitting up reluctantly, Wung accepted a napkin and asked whether Yeonsu had some kind of issue socializing. His friend replied bluntly that Wung wasn't exactly qualified to judge anyone else's social skills. While wiping his shirt, Wung argued that if someone made a mistake and apologized, the apology should be accepted. Holding up his stained shirt, he complained loudly that revenge hadn't been necessary. That was when they both noticed the damage he had done by rubbing the stain. Wung yelled in horror, demanding to know what happened to his shirt. His friend snapped back that stains had to be dabbed, not rubbed, and promptly took over cleaning it himself. Elsewhere, Director Park stood alone with a canned drink in hand, exhaustion clearly written across his face. Doubt crept in as he wondered whether the documentary would truly work out. He took a slow sip and released a weary sigh, already feeling drained. Just as he glanced toward his camera, he suddenly froze. A small note had been taped neatly on top of it. It urged him to take good care of their dear Wung. He peeled it off, reread the words, and frowned slightly, unable to guess who could have left it behind. Back in class, the teacher arrived and instructed everyone to settle down and open their books. His attention soon shifted to the back of the room, where he questioned why a student was wearing gym clothes. Wung quickly explained that his uniform had been ruined during filming. The teacher's patience snapped at once, scolding him for using filming as an excuse and reminding him that gym clothes were not allowed in his class. After a tense pause, he relented, saying that he would let it happen this time but warned that it would not happen again. Wung expressed his gratitude, then shot a brief glare toward Yeonsu, who pretended she had nothing to do with the stained shirt. Letting out a quiet sigh, Wung turned away and began sketching in his notebook as the lesson continued. When school ended, the director cheerfully praised their work and suggested grabbing something to eat to celebrate their first proper shoot. Receiving no response, he opened his eyes only to realize both seats were already empty. As Yeonsu walked down the hallway, whispers followed her. Students murmured about her being filmed, mocking how she had the highest grades in school yet still wanted to appear on television. To them, she seemed greedy. Yeonsu paid no attention and continued home without slowing her pace. Upon arriving, she announced herself at the gate and called out for her grandmother. When no answer came, worry crept in and she searched the house, eventually opening a door to find her grandmother inside. Her grandmother questioned the fuss, but Yeonsu immediately noticed something hidden behind her back. After a brief hesitation, her grandmother claimed she had only helped out a little. Yeonsu scolded her, reminding her of the promised break and the documentary pay. Their argument quickly escalated before softening into familiar banter, ending with Yeonsu hugging her grandmother tightly, smiling despite the protests. The following day at Wung's family diner, the table overflowed with food. His mother warmly fussed over the director, apologizing for not preparing more and joking about how difficult her son must be. The director reassured her, praising Wung and insisting filming had been easy thanks to him. Just then, Wung walked in with a pen between his lips and his bag slung over his shoulder, bluntly remarking that he had never wanted to be part of the documentary in the first place. The director asked what Wung meant, but Wung only raised his voice further, insisting that he did not want to be part of the documentary. His father came out at that moment, confusion written across his face, and questioned why he would say such a thing, adding that not many students were given the chance to work closely with the school's top-scoring student. Wung glanced at his father warily and reminded him that he had once said studying was not mandatory for him. His father responded with an easy smile, explaining that he had not meant it that way. What he truly wanted was for Wung to make a new friend through the filming. Someone besides Ji-Wung. Wung turned away with a groan, muttering that befriending Yeonsu was impossible. His father held on to him lightly and told him that was precisely why he needed to try harder. Wung smirked and suggested that his father befriend her instead, earning a light tap on the back and a playful insult. Before it could end there, his mother shouted from the kitchen, waving a large spoon and demanding to know why he would strike her precious son with such giant hands. Both father and son froze, staring at her before his father protested loudly that it had barely been a tap. Wung quickly backed him up, insisting it had not hurt. The tension spiraled into bickering, his father launching into a boastful rant about how people once lined up just to hold his hands, while his mother snapped back, telling him to go live with those admirers instead. A loud crash followed somewhere in the kitchen, leaving Wung staring blankly. As the argument continued, Wung let out a tired sigh and finally said that it was fine, and that he would do the documentary. Both of his parents turned to him at once, their expressions brightening as they eagerly sought confirmation. Ji-Wung, who had entered earlier, merely coughed and patted Wung's shoulder. Wung knew there was no taking it back now. At Yeonsu's house, her grandmother called her to breakfast, the table already neatly set. As they ate, her grandmother hesitated, muttering that there should be more side dishes and starting to stand. Yeonsu stopped her, calmly saying the kimchi stew alone was enough, scooping up another spoonful. Her grandmother could only stare at her before her eyes grew moist. She scolded Yeonsu softly, saying she should not accept food so easily from others, and should learn to be a little picky so she would not be overlooked. Yeonsu paused mid-bite, clearly surprised, and asked what had upset her that morning, wondering if it was because of the scolding the day before. Her grandmother turned away, claiming she had lost her appetite, and walked out. Yeonsu called after her, warning her not to sneak off to work, threatening to get angry if she did. From outside, her grandmother glanced back quietly. Yeonsu's intuition was as sharp as ever. On the way to school, the director suddenly slowed his steps and spoke to Wung with unusual seriousness, explaining that he had met many kinds of people and trusted his judgment. Even if Yeonsu appeared cold and intimidating, he believed she was not a bad person. Before he could say more, Wung sighed and brushed it off, saying he already had a plan for the day. The director stared at him in disbelief, and Ji-Wung did the same, both wondering when exactly Wung had become someone with a plan. In class, Wung lay sprawled over a stack of books, fast asleep, drool pooling at the corner of his mouth. Ji-Wung watched him with a blank expression, wondering if sleeping through the third period was truly part of that plan, though it suited Wung well enough. His gaze drifted to Yeonsu, who sat upright, eyes fixed forward, before briefly glancing sideways with a sharp, unreadable look. Wung remained lost in his own world. In that world, 4 men, including Wung, sat together on a yacht near traditional pavilion-like structures, enjoying the calm surroundings. One of them expressed how fulfilling it felt to be with friends while appreciating art, then turned to Wung and mentioned hearing about an impressive landscape drawing he had made. Wung responded modestly, laughing under his breath and handing over the sketch, dismissing it as nothing more than casual doodling. The others stared at the paper in stunned silence, one of them remarking that it looked like a collaboration between Monet and Van Gogh. The man seated in the middle declared that he had never seen such a masterpiece before, while another remarked that Wung's talent was being wasted where he was and suggested that he should move to Hanyang City instead. Wung accepted the praise with a proud smile, calmly stating that he was satisfied living an idle life. The peaceful scene shattered when a loud crash echoed across the ship. A figure suddenly appeared, standing tall with a sword in hand, announcing that the high treason criminal, Wung, was to be restrained. As ropes were tied around him, Wung broke into tears, desperately pleading with Commander Yeonsu to hear him out, insisting the accusation was unfair. He argued that he had spent his entire life being lazy and questioned how someone like him could possibly commit treason, claiming he had been framed. Commander Yeonsu raised her sword without hesitation and declared that living lazily for one's entire life was, in fact, the crime. The blade came down, and Wung jolted awake with a sharp gasp. His eyes widened as he froze, staring at a pencil being sharpened beside him. When Yeonsu finished, she blew lightly on the sharpened tip before turning her gaze toward him. Wung shuddered uncontrollably, a chill running down his spine. She was terrifying. Later that day, as Wung and Ji-Wung ran laps around the field, Wung complained breathlessly that he had worked extremely hard to get along with Yeonsu, asking if Ji-Wung had noticed his effort. Ji-Wung replied casually that he had only noticed how hard Wung had napped. Wung groaned, saying she had even invaded his dreams, while Ji-Wung suggested it was because he slept too much and advised him to draw instead. Wung wiped sweat from his face, panting as he questioned how he was supposed to draw when Yeonsu sat so close, surrounded by such an intimidating aura. His legs finally gave out, and he collapsed onto the ground, clinging to Ji-Wung and begging him to stop running because he felt like he might faint. After some time, they ended up resting in an open area. Wung lay flat on his back, muttering that it was unbearably hot. Ji-Wung sat nearby, calmly sipping his drink, and suggested that Wung try improving his grades since he was seated next to the top student in school. When Wung did not respond, Ji-Wung sighed and asked whether he was not tired of deliberately answering questions wrong. Wung replied that his parents' only wish was for him to stay healthy and that he was simply fulfilling that request. Ji-Wung doubted they had ever imagined that wish translating into last place. Wung suddenly sprang up, arguing that if he improved his grades during the documentary, Yeonsu's ego would only grow larger. Ji-Wung glanced at him, asking if he was not overthinking things. Leaning against Ji-Wung's shoulder, Wung insisted that Ji-Wung could say that only because he had not experienced Yeonsu firsthand. He added that appearances were deceiving. On the outside, she looked innocent like a bunny, but once she opened her mouth, she was as vicious as a shark. Ji-Wung did not respond, simply taking another sip of his drink while quietly reflecting on Wung's comparison. Later that day, the director stood by his camera, adjusting it repeatedly, clearly dissatisfied. He had barely captured any usable footage. Yeonsu sat quietly with her book, fully focused on studying, while Wung had already fallen asleep beside her. A female student suddenly approached and asked if she could make a suggestion. Slightly startled, the director gave his approval, and she leaned in to whisper her idea. His expression brightened almost instantly. After dismissing the student, he asked Wung and Yeonsu to step outside and then revealed his plan. They both stared at him in disbelief, questioning whether he truly wanted them to play badminton. The director responded with an easy smile, explaining that everyone had been studying hard and deserved a break, adding that he had already received permission from their teacher. Yeonsu remarked that she doubted their classmates would appreciate it, but before she could finish, the announcement had already spread. The classroom erupted in cheers, the students buzzing with excitement. Turning back to them, the director added that anyone who did not feel like playing could simply take a nap. Wung yawned immediately and announced that he would be doing just that, while Yeonsu raised her hand and calmly stated that she was fine with participating. Out on the field, the students played energetically. Ji-Wung, standing beside the director, asked whether the footage was good enough. The director replied that it was a fair question, admitting that he was beginning to think the decision might have been a mistake. Before long, Wung, who had not been allowed to nap, and Yeonsu found themselves facing each other, rackets in hand. The match began, and after a short while, Wung complained loudly, asking how long they were expected to continue. When the director answered that it had only been 5 minutes, Wung pinched the bridge of his nose, swung his racket lazily, and muttered that he was unbearably sleepy. The shuttlecock flew off course and struck Yeonsu on the head before dropping to the ground. The director and Ji-Wung froze in shock. Wung hurriedly apologized, but Yeonsu had already raised her racket and struck back without hesitation. Wung collapsed instantly. Looking down at him, Yeonsu stated calmly that her hand had slipped and offered a brief apology before turning away and walking off. Wung scrambled to his feet and tried to chase after her, but the director and Ji-Wung restrained him as he struggled helplessly. That evening, as Yeonsu dried her hair at home, her grandmother watched her quietly before commenting that she seemed to have enjoyed filming, noting that she had been humming. Yeonsu denied it outright. Her grandmother then suggested that she try befriending the boy she was filming with, saying it would be good for her to have at least one friend. Yeonsu stepped closer, wrapped her arms around her grandmother, and kissed her cheek, insisting that she already had friends and that her best one was right there. Her grandmother asked why she was suddenly being so clingy. Turning away, Yeonsu replied that her grandmother was all she needed and that she did not require anyone else. Her grandmother could only sigh as she watched her walk off. At Wung's house, he sat motionless at his desk while his parents peeked through the doorway. His father whispered that an hour had already passed, while his mother replied excitedly that she could not believe she was finally seeing Wung sit at his desk, declaring that joining the documentary had been a brilliant idea. Wung remained still, his focus wavering, jaw tightening as he stared at the words written on the page before him. How to beat Yeonsu Guk. Wung began to reflect on his childhood, retracing the path that had led him to this point. His name was Wung Choi, and he had been born into a family that owned a restaurant. No, several restaurants. He had always known how fortunate he was, and because of that, he had lived his life yielding easily, letting others win without resistance. Greed had never been part of him. The only thing he had ever truly wanted was to draw freely, spending his days sketching under the shade of a tree, unbothered and at peace. That peaceful life, however, had been disrupted the moment Yeonsu entered it. As the thought crossed his mind, he grabbed his head tightly, his brows knitting together. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that she had been a source of trouble from the very beginning. His mind drifted back 2 years earlier to the Midsummer High School entrance ceremony of 2009. He remembered standing among the crowd as the principal handed Yeonsu her certificate for entering high school as the top student. The hall had filled with applause, and Wung had clapped along with the others, until his hands slowly stopped. His gaze had remained fixed on her, his expression vacant, as if he had drifted into another world. As Yeonsu stared down at the certificate in her hands, whispers had spread among the students. Some had muttered that her uniform looked more like her father's suit, while others had laughed that she seemed eager to announce to the world that she was the stereotypical smart student. When she stepped down from the stage and walked past them, the laughter continued. Yet the moment she turned to look at them, those same students had immediately looked away, pretending nothing had happened. Wung, however, had not looked away. His eyes had stayed on her, unfocused and dazed. When she noticed, she had frowned and called out to him, startling him so badly that he had nearly jumped out of his skin. With her brows drawn together, she had demanded to know what he was staring at. Thinking back on it now, Wung felt that he should have understood what kind of person she was even then. But knowing it now changed nothing. He was already stuck. Clenching his jaw, he picked up his book and began to write with determination, his pen pressing firmly into the paper. He reminded himself that he was the kind of person who followed through on what he said he would do. Almost immediately, he crossed out what he had written. Studying, he realized, was not her weakness. But students who devoted all their energy to exams often lacked practical, everyday common sense. That, he decided, would be his angle. A small, self-satisfied smirk tugged at his lips as he leaned back slightly. In his mind, the plan was flawless. He felt like a genius. The following day at school, Wung peeked through the classroom door, his eyes narrowing as they landed on Yeonsu. She was his target. As he stepped inside, he caught the tail end of a conversation between her and the director. The director was enthusiastically telling her that he had followed her advice from last time and that it had worked perfectly. Yeonsu responded with a faint smirk, remarking that such a level of common sense should have been obvious. The director laughed sheepishly, praising her and saying that he would leave everything to her, adding that she was simply amazing. Only then did the two of them notice Wung's presence. Wung stood there silently, staring at them with the same unfocused, dazed expression. Later, back at home, he immediately crossed out another line in his notebook. Common sense, he admitted, was not her weakness either. After thinking long and hard, he convinced himself that there was no way she could possibly have an appreciation for literature. That belief, however, didn't even last a full day. The very next day at school, Yeonsu stood in front of the camera, reciting a poem. Her delivery was steady, her emotions perfectly controlled and precise. As Wung watched, sweat began to form along his temples. She calmly explained that it was her favorite poem. The director reacted strongly, praising her performance and admitting that it had been so moving he had nearly cried. He went on to compliment her for memorizing poetry so effortlessly. Wung could only stare, his eyes wider and more unfocused than they had been the day before, as another carefully constructed assumption collapsed right in front of him. Back at home, Wung quickly crossed out his previous conclusion. Literature, he admitted, was definitely not her weakness either. After sitting in silence for a while, his expression slowly shifted, and a deep grin spread across his face as he scribbled something new into his notebook, reasoning that perhaps she had no interest in music. That assumption barely survived a day. The very next day, Yeonsu stood calmly in class, playing Vivaldi's Four Seasons on the recorder with practiced ease. Wung returned home and crossed it out again, his pen dragging harshly across the page. He immediately wrote down another supposed weakness, only to watch it collapse the following day when Yeonsu was seen interacting fluently with a woman in another language. As Wung stared in disbelief, he wondered how she even knew how to speak Indonesian. Back at home, he crossed that out as well, his movements growing sharper. He brought out yet another weakness, but the next day at school, she shattered that too. This time, she was dancing. At that point, Wung could only stare, utterly stunned. It felt as though she had to be doing this on purpose. Eventually, back at home once more, Wung finally ruled it out entirely. Yeonsu had no weaknesses. The realization made him fume, his grip tightening around his pen. There was no way a person could exist without a single flaw. Scribbling something else into his book, he acknowledged that it might be unfair, but by now it couldn't be helped. The following day at school, Ji-woong and the director stood close together, both unconsciously leaning back with wary expressions. The director asked Wung if he was certain about what they were about to do, admitting that while it would make great footage, he didn't want Wung to go overboard just because they were filming. Wung, already bouncing slightly on his feet, insisted that he wasn't overdoing anything and laughed confidently. Yeonsu, meanwhile, calmly stretched her arms as if nothing concerned her. Wung announced that exercising was his hobby and suggested that they begin immediately. The director blinked in surprise, since Wung was usually known for sleeping through everything. Other students gradually gathered around, curious. Wung stepped forward and began stretching exaggeratedly, stealing a glance at Yeonsu, who was also stretching with a straight, unreadable face. The director then called out for them to start, explaining that he would count from 1 to 3 and that whoever reached the top first would win. When the count reached 3, both of them climbed, but Yeonsu moved faster. In a sudden motion, she kicked Wung hard on the cheek, sending him crashing down to the ground before he could react. Later, as Wung splashed water onto his face in the bathroom, Ji-woong told him flatly that he should give up. He simply couldn't win against Yeonsu. Wung turned toward him with tears gathering in his eyes and demanded to know how he could say something like that to his friend. He insisted that Ji-woong should be cheering him on and tilted his head slightly to show the bruise on his face. He was genuinely hurt. As he sniffled, Wung's expression slowly shifted as he began to think deeply. The more he reflected, the more something stood out. Yeonsu was always alone, in the classroom, during lunch, even on her way home. The realization hit him all at once, and he suddenly burst into hysterical laughter. At last, he had found her weakness. Of course, she had no friends. With such a horrid personality, who would ever want to befriend her? Still laughing under his breath, he left the bathroom and headed toward the classroom. Peeking through the doorway, he saw a student handing Yeonsu a book for submission. He observed quietly. It didn't look like she was being bullied at all. He continued watching as she approached other students, firmly instructing them to hand in their books immediately. One of the students groaned, realizing she was on duty that week, and reluctantly complied. Wung scoffed softly. If anything, she seemed to be the one bullying others. As Yeonsu turned and walked away, the students began whispering among themselves, commenting that it was troublesome to get on her bad side because she never let anything slide. Some even said she was scarier than the teacher. Wung nodded along, fully agreeing. She really was difficult to deal with. As she exited the classroom, Wung watched her leave before lowering his gaze to his notebook. There it was, written clearly. Yeonsu's weakness was having no friends. He closed the book and held it tightly. Then, after a moment, scratched his head. What was he even doing? He muttered to himself with a sigh before walking away. In the teacher's office, Yeonsu handed over the collected books. The teacher praised her diligence, and she responded quietly. Her arm felt sore, prompting her to stretch it slightly. Instinctively, she glanced at her watch to check the time before heading straight to the library. Standing in front of the clerk's desk with her face scrunched in frustration, she asked about a book titled Discourse on Inequality. The clerk informed her that another student had already borrowed it, adding that Yeonsu always seemed to be one step behind. With a faintly disappointed expression, Yeonsu thanked the clerk, wished her a good day, and selected another book before walking away. Between the shelves nearby, a student stood still with a book covering their face. The book was Discourse on Inequality, the very one Yeonsu had been searching for. When the student lowered it, a deep smirk appeared on their face. It was Wung. At last, he believed he had truly found Yeonsu's weakness. Yeonsu began to reflect on herself. Her name was Yeonsu Guk, and she had never cared about the nonsense surrounding gold spoons or dirt spoons, or debates about being rich or poor. All she knew was that ever since she had been able to hold a spoon and eat her grandmother's food, she had never lost to anyone. That belief remained unshaken, until she met Wung Choi. During her first year, on a particular day when she was in the library borrowing books, the librarian casually commented that she was borrowing a large number of books once again. Yeonsu responded calmly that she was actually reading less than usual since it was exam season. The librarian smiled and remarked that she was truly something else. Yeonsu's gaze then shifted to the side, where a list was pasted on the wall titled Reading Winners of May. She stepped closer and examined it carefully. At the top of the list was the name Wung Choi, while her own name appeared in second place. Her expression stiffened. She immediately turned back to the librarian and asked who Wung Choi was. The librarian appeared surprised that Yeonsu didn't know and pointed toward a section of the library. Yeonsu followed the direction and spotted a boy seated quietly, his attention fixed on a book in front of him. As he flipped through the pages, she approached him directly and asked about his rank in school. Wung, looking dazed, replied that he was ranked 267th. Yeonsu's eyes widened as she asked how many students attended the school. He answered calmly that there were 267 students in total. For a moment, Yeonsu didn't know what to say. From that day on, her first impression of Wung was that he seemed foolish. Even afterward, when she saw him sleeping carelessly in class or being punished by teachers, she continued to see him as nothing more than a fool. Someone like Wung, she believed, could never be considered her rival. That perception remained unchanged until the day her teacher informed her about the documentary. He explained that a friend of his worked as a producer at a TV station and wanted to film a documentary about the school lives of the students ranked first and last. Even when she received the offer to participate, Wung never crossed her mind. She had simply stared at the proposal and asked whether she would be paid. Her only concern at the time was that her grandmother wouldn't have to work for a few days if she earned money from it. After filming began, the most she felt toward Wung was mild sympathy. Nothing more. She had no idea. None at all. In the present, while searching through the library shelves, Yeonsu noticed something odd. She checked the system and quickly discovered an inconsistency. She approached the librarian and pointed out that the database showed several philosophy-related books as available, yet they were nowhere to be found on the shelves. The librarian, taken aback, replied that the system showed no errors and suggested that someone might already be reading them. Yeonsu lowered her gaze, thinking carefully. Who would possibly read all of those difficult books at once? Suddenly, her eyes snapped open. She hoped it wasn't the person she was thinking of. Without hesitation, she walked toward the same area of the library she had visited the previous year. There, she found the missing books piled up neatly. Standing with her arms folded, she looked down at Wung, who had a pencil held loosely in his mouth as he read. She asked whether he intended to read all of those books at once. Without looking up, Wung replied that he might, adding that he had some research to do as well. Her irritation flared instantly. She snapped that he couldn't monopolize so many books when others might need them, and demanded to know why he wanted to read them in the first place. Wung finally looked up at her and broke into a wide grin, telling her that if she asked nicely, he might consider answering. Her eyes burned with anger as she asked what he had just said, referring to him as a punk. What she didn't realize was that if the person challenging her had truly been a fool, the blow to her pride would have been far greater. She stormed out of the library, her steps heavy, and grabbed a cup of water, gulping it down in one go. Her fingers tightened around the cup as her anger lingered, startling students who passed by and caught sight of her expression. She had let her guard down because of his harmless-looking face. After a moment, she released a slow breath, forcing herself to calm down. There was no need to rush. Once lunchtime ended, he would have to return the books. And when that happened, she would borrow them herself. Yeonsu returned to the library, her steps quick and determined. Moments later, the bell rang, announcing the end of lunch break. Her shoulders stiffened as realization hit her all at once. This was her chance. Suppressing her irritation, she hurried toward Wung, who was still there. He looked up at her calmly and remarked that he had been right all along. She should have simply said that she wanted the book. She immediately rejected that idea, brushing it off with a sharp huff. Without another word, Wung gathered the stack of books into his arms and began walking away, muttering under his breath about whatever she had just said. Yeonsu stood still, watching his back as he left, her gaze dim and unsettled. Snapping herself out of it, she cursed him silently for wasting her time and rushed to grab another book instead. She quickly approached the librarian and said she wanted to borrow it, but the librarian firmly told her to return to class since the bell had already rung. Panic crept into Yeonsu's expression as she insisted that it would only take a minute. At that moment, Wung passed by and quietly shushed her, prompting her to glare sharply in his direction. With a satisfied smirk and a pencil resting loosely between his lips, Wung pointed upward. Yeonsu followed his gesture and saw the sign posted above them. Quiet indoors. She froze, her face paling as the meaning sank in. There was no denying it. This round was clearly her loss. Tightening her grip on her book, she turned and rushed back to class. She had wasted too much time focusing on Wung's slow movements, and worse, his infuriatingly arrogant attitude. Later that day, during the interview session, Wung explained that all he wanted was to live peacefully as he always had, occasionally helping his parents at their restaurants. He added that he genuinely did not understand why attending a university was considered so important. Yeonsu immediately countered his statement, asserting that adults needed to become independent from their parents and learn how to stand on their own. Casting a sharp glance in Wung's direction, she made it clear that she despised people who inconvenienced others. Wung responded casually, remarking that he despised people who were careless with their words. Yeonsu turned to him at once, her posture straightening as anger flared in her eyes, demanding to know if his comment had been directed at her. He simply replied that he was saying what he thought, then slowly added a subjective remark with a deep smirk. Without waiting for a response, he stood up, stretched slightly, and announced that he was going to the bathroom, yawning as he walked away. Yeonsu remained seated, staring after him as surprise flickered across her face. The director, smiling awkwardly, commented that Wung had become much more talkative since he started spending time with her. However, before he could continue, he noticed the sudden shift in Yeonsu's expression. The air around her felt tense, charged with restrained anger. The director stiffened, a shrill sound escaping him as he realized things were taking a dangerous turn. Later, Yeonsu leaned against an open window, gripping the frame as she took steady breaths to calm herself. She reminded herself that reacting would only mean letting him win. Just then, a voice spoke from behind her, suggesting that she give up on the book-borrowing battle altogether. Turning around, she saw Ji-Wung standing there. He explained that Wung had always been obsessed with just two things since childhood: books, and drawing. By now, he said, Wung likely had the entire library memorized. Yeonsu's expression shifted slightly at that, and Ji-Wung stepped closer, elaborating that Wung always drew the same thing over and over again. He laughed softly, adding that Wung hated being told that. A faint smirk appeared on Yeonsu's face as she stared ahead, clearly taking note of the information. Ji-Wung, noticing that she had gone quiet again, began to turn away. Before he could leave, however, Yeonsu called out to him. Then, unexpectedly, she asked him to tell her more. The next day, rain poured down heavily. Wung's mother stood by the doorway, sighing as she watched the sheets of rain fall. Just then, Wung passed by her, casually announcing that he was heading out. She immediately stopped him, telling him that she would ask his father to give him a ride since the rain was so heavy. Wung reassured her that it was fine, explaining that it didn't take long to get to school anyway. He opened his umbrella, waved goodbye, and told her he would see her later, smiling brightly. As he stepped outside, his mother called after him, warning him not to run so he wouldn't slip and fall. He turned back briefly, smiling again and telling her not to worry, but she continued watching him with concern as he walked away. On the way to school, Wung looked ahead and let out a small sigh when he spotted a familiar figure. It was Ji-Wung. He hurried over and called out loudly, startling Ji-Wung so badly that he nearly jumped. Noticing his reaction, Wung asked why he looked so surprised, then went on to ask why Ji-Wung hadn't come over for breakfast and whether he had overslept. Ji-Wung muttered a quiet confirmation, and Wung cheerfully told him that sleeping in was perfectly normal. As they continued walking, Wung casually draped an arm over Ji-Wung's shoulder. A short distance behind them, Yeonsu followed at a slower pace, watching the two of them in silence. Once in class, Wung unpacked his bag and began searching through his books. After rummaging for a while, he realized that he had left his pen cutter at home. The realization unsettled him. Moments later, a pen cutter slid across the desk toward him. A voice informed him that he could use it. When he looked up, he saw that it was Yeonsu. Wung flinched instinctively, startled and uneasy at the same time. He thanked her nervously, but inside his thoughts were in turmoil. He couldn't understand what had changed or why she was suddenly acting kind. Glancing at her again, unease settled deep in his chest. He had a bad feeling about it. As the teacher continued writing on the board, Wung shifted his focus back and forth between the lesson and his drawing. Despite the rain, he felt strangely optimistic. His drawing was coming together unusually well, and it had been a long time since he had been able to finish one. He thought that maybe, just maybe, today would be the day. Then the desk began to tremble. At first it was faint, but the shaking continued at a steady rhythm. Sweat formed on his brow as he wondered if it was an earthquake. Bending down slightly, he looked beneath the desk and saw Yeonsu's foot tapping against it. His mind flashed back to the previous day, when Yeonsu had asked Ji-Wung to tell her more about Wung. Ji-Wung hesitated, asking what she meant. Yeonsu had explained calmly that since she would be spending the next month with Wung, she simply wanted to know what she should be careful about. She blinked softly while saying it. Ji-Wung, flustered, had scratched the back of his neck and replied that there wasn't really anything she needed to worry about. Yeonsu had reassured him that even trivial things were fine and blinked again, even more gently. After thinking for a moment, Ji-Wung had finally mentioned that Wung became extremely sensitive whenever his drawing was going well. That information had been exactly what Yeonsu needed. Back in the present, she shook the desk more enthusiastically, clearly energized. She had asked what she should be careful about, but she had never said she would actually be careful. Wung stared at her in disbelief. After a moment, he quietly told her that the desk was shaking. Yeonsu reacted with exaggerated surprise, claiming that she hadn't noticed at all. At that point, her shamelessness was impossible to ignore. Wung turned back to his drawing, forcing himself to calm down. He reminded himself that today wasn't the day to pick a fight. Yeonsu glanced sideways at him, recalling another detail Ji-Wung had shared, that Wung became especially sensitive on rainy days. Slowly, she began clicking her pen repeatedly. The sound grated on his nerves. He tried to ignore it, but his focus shattered. Irritation built quickly, and he finally turned toward her, asking her to stop. Yeonsu apologized softly, twirling the pen between her fingers. Wung sighed and turned back to his drawing. Then another sound echoed against the desk. Tracing the source of the sound, Wung realized that Yeonsu was using her pen to draw directly on the desk. By that point, his patience had worn dangerously thin. Unable to endure it any longer, he abruptly stood up and left the classroom without asking for permission. The teacher, momentarily caught off guard, turned to Yeonsu and asked what had happened to Wung. Yeonsu responded that she didn't know, gesturing innocently as she spoke. Ji-Wung quickly followed after Wung. He caught up to him on the staircase where Wung was already shouting in frustration, scratching his head repeatedly as if trying to shake off his irritation. Wung protested loudly, insisting that Yeonsu had been doing it on purpose. Ji-Wung, clearly surprised, asked what he meant. Wung explained that she had kept disturbing him while he was drawing, adding that she had suddenly started shaking her legs out of nowhere. He muttered that he should have known something was wrong the moment she let him borrow her pen cutter. In his mind, there was no way Yeonsu would ever be genuinely nice to him. As he thought about it more deeply, another unsettling question surfaced. How had she known that he drew especially well on rainy days? Ji-Wung's expression immediately darkened. He was just about to admit that he had told her when Wung suddenly turned toward him and half-jokingly claimed that Yeonsu must have supernatural powers. Ji-Wung swallowed the truth, his face stiff. Back in the classroom, Yeonsu stretched comfortably in her seat, clearly pleased. It had been a long time since she had felt this relaxed. She glanced toward Wung's desk and thought to herself that he always acted as though he was creating some grand masterpiece. Leaning slightly closer to observe, she let out a quiet sigh. As usual, he was drawing the same things, trees and buildings. Still, she admitted internally that it didn't look half bad. The director soon approached her, his eyes settling on the drawing as well. He quietly remarked that it was well done. Yeonsu asked if he truly meant it, and the director responded enthusiastically, saying that it would be good to film it. Yeonsu immediately turned toward him and firmly stated that filming without Wung's permission wouldn't be appropriate. The director froze in surprise, then scratched the back of his head with a sheepish smile, admitting that she was right. He apologized, explaining that he had been too focused on gathering footage for the documentary. Growing overly animated, the director then commented that Yeonsu was clearly looking out for Wung. Without lifting her gaze from her book, she casually dismissed the idea. Realizing he had misunderstood, the director apologized once more and quietly walked away. Later in class, Yeonsu glanced in Wung's direction again. As expected, he was completely absorbed in his drawing. She found it strangely irritating, thinking that someone like him should be directing that level of focus toward his studies instead. Watching him continue, she briefly wondered if he had begun preparing a portfolio to enter a fine arts university. Then she remembered. He had already said he wasn't going to university at all. Without realizing it, she kept staring. When Wung suddenly glanced sideways and caught her looking, she quickly turned away, pretending to concentrate on her book. After the teacher finished the lesson and left the classroom, the students burst into chatter. Yeonsu, however, felt anything but relieved. She couldn't believe she had missed the first 30 minutes of the lesson. Worse still, she had wasted that time paying attention to his pointless drawing. Standing up to go speak with the teacher, she accidentally shook the desk hard. Realizing what she had done, she turned quickly to apologize, but Wung didn't even look at her. His eyes remained fixed on the page. Leaning closer, Yeonsu noticed the damage. Because of her, he had already made a mistake in the drawing. As the students excitedly filmed the double rainbow outside, marveling that they had never seen one before, one of them turned back and asked the director whether he wasn't going to record it as well. The director, visibly tense, replied that it wasn't the time to be filming a rainbow. His attention remained fixed on Wung and Yeonsu. The atmosphere in the classroom had grown heavy and serious. Wung clenched his fist tightly at his side while Yeonsu stood still, her gaze locked on him. When Yeonsu began to apologize, explaining that it had been a mistake, Wung abruptly slammed his sketchbook shut. He apologized to the director for this, then stated that he was done filming for the day. Without waiting, he stood up and walked out of the classroom. The director hurried after him, calling for him to wait, while Ji-Wung quickly told the director that he would check on Wung instead. Left behind, Yeonsu sank into her seat, her thoughts spinning wildly. She realized how careless she had been and couldn't believe she had caused such a mistake. She had only meant to annoy him slightly, nothing more. Glancing sideways at Wung's drawing book, she scanned the room cautiously. When she confirmed that no one was paying attention, she stood up quickly, rushed to his desk, and opened the sketchbook. Carefully, she applied correction fluid to the damaged area. Once she was finished, she paused and looked at it closely, a small smile forming when she saw that it looked almost as good as new. Later, when the teacher entered the classroom, he immediately announced that class was starting. His gaze shifted to the back, where an empty seat caught his attention, and he asked who normally sat there. At that moment, Wung was just stepping into the classroom. He apologized quietly, his expression lowered. The teacher scolded him sharply, telling him to sit down and not disrupt the class atmosphere. Wung obeyed and took his seat slowly. As the lesson resumed, Wung reached for his drawing book. Yeonsu glanced at him briefly from the side but quickly turned forward again. Without a word, Wung slipped the book back into his bag and lifted his gaze to the front, his face unreadable. The tension in the air was thick enough that Yeonsu swallowed nervously, a thin layer of sweat forming along her temples. When the class ended, the students thanked the teacher. Wung immediately stood up and turned to leave. Yeonsu called out to him, but he didn't respond. He walked straight out of the classroom without looking back. Yeonsu remained where she was, watching him go, unsure of what she should do next. Outside, the sun shone brightly. Wung sat down on a bench directly under the heat, the sunlight bearing down on him relentlessly. Ji-Wung soon joined him and handed him a can of drink. He asked why Wung was sitting in the sun, reminding him that he hated doing so and would only end up with a sunburn. Wung remained silent, staring ahead. Ji-Wung continued, saying that he was certain Yeonsu hadn't done it intentionally. As he was about to confess that he was the one who had told Yeonsu about Wung's sensitivity while drawing, Wung suddenly spoke. In a quiet voice, he told Ji-Wung that Yeonsu looked really tired. During the lunch break, the students gathered in small groups, chatting and enjoying their meals. Yeonsu, however, sat quietly on her own, staring down at her food and absent-mindedly picking at it. Nearby, the director let out a nervous laugh and mentioned that Wung wouldn't be joining them for lunch because he had been called into the office, apologizing for the inconvenience. Yeonsu didn't respond. Her thoughts began to race. When she reflected on it, she realized it had been a while since she had eaten alone. Almost immediately, she pushed the thought aside. It wasn't as though they had been having lunch together for very long, and besides, Wung was irritating. With a slight scowl, she began eating her food more forcefully. Just then, the chair across from her slid back. Assuming it was Wung, she glanced up quickly, only to find Ji-Wung instead. He asked if he could sit there, and she allowed him to. Once seated, he admitted that he felt responsible for what had happened earlier. Yeonsu, still eating, questioned why he would blame himself. In her mind, she acknowledged that she had only used him to get back at Wung and annoy him, but it had ended up backfiring on her. Ji-Wung explained calmly that Wung sometimes behaved that way toward him as well, but that he eventually cooled down if left alone, though it usually took quite a long time. Yeonsu bluntly stated that she didn't care, adding that the director still had a documentary to film and that was her only concern. Ji-Wung's expression softened as he told her that if she wanted to resolve the situation quickly, the simplest approach would be the most effective. That caught Yeonsu's attention, and she finally looked up at him. Seeing her interest, Ji-Wung explained that it was the oldest way humans had used to resolve conflicts. After school ended, Wung walked home quietly, his steps slow and unhurried. That silence was abruptly broken when someone called out to him loudly. It was Yeonsu. She repeatedly apologized, raising her voice as she followed after him, asking whether his behavior was his way of getting back at her. Wung responded slowly, saying that they should talk the next day, explaining that she was being too loud and that he was tired. Yeonsu frowned deeply and shot back that none of this would have happened if he had been clear from the beginning. He had spoken about drawing as though it were just casual doodling, and by downplaying it, others naturally wouldn't take it seriously either. Wung didn't reply right away. He paused, let out a tired sigh, and explained quietly that there were things in the world that couldn't be lightly described with words like liking or disliking. He added that she didn't even understand why he drew in the first place. With a slight throb in his head, he sighed again and said he didn't have the energy to deal with her. Yeonsu brushed past him briskly, remarking that if it weren't for the documentary, she wouldn't even be talking to someone like him who avoided problems. She then turned back, her expression blank, and asked whether he truly believed she wouldn't understand. She added that it was easier for someone like him who had never worked hard for anything in his life to say such things before turning away again. After taking a few steps, she heard him call out to her. He told her that if this was about the documentary, she shouldn't apologize because he intended to quit. That stopped her immediately. She turned back in shock and hurried toward him, asking what he was talking about and reminding him that he had already received the signing bonus. Wung replied indifferently that his parents would handle it, pointing out that he came from a wealthy family. Yeonsu stared at him and asked whether he truly realized how irresponsible he was being. Wung, still unconcerned, replied that she already knew, and it wasn't as though she had any expectations of him to begin with. Yeonsu sighed deeply and shook her head, realizing she hadn't expected things to turn out this badly. Wung turned away casually and walked off, telling her to think whatever she wanted of him. Yeonsu let out a tired sigh, tilting her head and pressing a hand against it, wondering what all of this had to do with a lousy drawing. That made Wung stop in his tracks. He turned back and told her that now he finally understood why she didn't have any friends. And we're stopping here for now. Wung just landed a final blow, and Yeonsu definitely isn't the type to let that slide. So answer this. Who's more wrong right now? Wung for provoking her, or Yeonsu for always treating him like trash? The title of the manhwa is Our Beloved Summer, and we covered up to Chapter 7. Comment Part 2 if you want the continuation. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. See you in the next video.